All right. I'm very conscious of the passage of time. I was threatened with grievous bodily harm by a senior German military officer. I won't say which service, but we definitely have to be out of here because the minister has to get a plane by 6:40. And so in the interest of time, I'm going to be extremely brief and efficient in my introduction. The minister you already know. To my far left here, no implication about political orientation, is Lieutenant General retired Wolf-Dieter Löser, who has had a distinguished career in the German Armed Forces as Deputy Commander Operations, among others, with ISAF in Afghanistan, as Commander of the Federal Armed Forces General Staff College in Hamburg, and finally, just before his retirement for 3 years, as the Commander of the NATO Defense College in Rome. To my right is Dr. Franziska Brandner, who is a member of the European Parliament for the Green Party and their foreign policy spokeswoman. And finally, Jan Techow on my left, who is the director of Carnegie Europe. I know that both Jan and Franziska definitely have strong opinions and are not afraid of voicing them, so I think this is going to be an interesting discussion. So that's not to say the general doesn't, but a little bit more practice in being discreet about your opinions as a senior officer. But I'm hoping you will.
Let's wait and see. Let's wait and see what's going on.
Okay. Now, I thought what I would start with is a series of questions. And let me start with a woman on the panel, Franziska. And I'm going to sort of start sentences and ask you to finish them. It is said that Germany is now normal, including in security policy. For a Green member of the European Parliament, that means?
That we need to be aware that others don't think so yet.
Who?
Oh, like, for example, right now, the Greek people, they still have different memories of Germany, and we feel them coming up.
Humanitarian intervention in Greece by the German armed forces? I hope not.
No, but if you had the same style as we have in economic crisis in security matters, we would be in serious trouble.
Okay. General Löser, Germany is an economic superpower, but a military?
Important power.
This is what I meant.
Not the number one.
Okay, we will get to the bottom of this, I promise. Jan Techow. Germany has a right to a United Nations Security Council seat because? Deep silence.
It doesn't have a right to
No, exactly.
the Security Council seat.
Do you want to explain that, perhaps?
I think the underperformance of Germany in security matters over the last 10, 15 years has been so significant that there's very little trust in Germany as a potential key player on the security stage in the Security Council. Plus, I believe that it would make very little sense, given the great changes that the minister has talked about and the changing global development and environment, to add another singular European nation state to the Security Council without doing something more coordinated amongst Europeans. So the real challenge is much bigger than the German seat.
And of course, we already have a German as Pope. So with that, to the defense minister. After we all at NATO leaves Afghanistan in 2014, we hope 2014 and not earlier, we will need NATO for?
Article 5 is still the basis for everything. And if you ask Polish people in Lithuania and elsewhere, they know what I mean. Perhaps Turkey as well. And then we have to play an important role in the world, but not the only important role in security issues in the world. But I would like to make quite clear that I totally disagree with the analysis of you that Germany's security policy failed over the last 10 or 15 years. I just tried in my speech to explain that where we come from up to 1990, where we are now, this is much more than expected. and quite successful.
I disagree.
Well, we'll have some time to flesh this out on this panel. And let me, as a moderator, I'm supposed to be the conciliator here of opposing positions. I perhaps
You wanted a tough discussion, so here we
Don't
start.
worry. Believe me, I have questions for you. But I think it's possible to say that we did more than expected and still are not doing as much as is currently expected. But let me ask you something as a follow-up to what you were saying about Germany Germany must be able to do more, and we as Europeans must be able to do more together. And I've heard you say now in several speeches in Berlin and elsewhere that you really don't think much of building up a separate European defense identity if we have NATO. Respectfully, I would like to ask whether you're not fighting a rearguard action here against if you will, a political idea that is already dead. Isn't the more serious case that we might be presented with the following, which I would say is a thinking Libya forward? We have to deal with a security threat in the European neighborhood, so it is our business, A. B, the Americans are busy, preoccupied elsewhere, maybe fighting a war in Southeast Asia. And 3, they can't lend us their assets, as they did in Libya, because they need their assets, and because they don't have more of them because of their own defense cuts.
But talking us, it's wrong. We're Germans here.
I know.
In Libya, it's wrong.
Okay. Franziska, we'll get to that. But isn't that the case that we have to prepare for? In other words, a NATO that doesn't have the Americans in it?
No. Your analysis is right.
Okay.
But number one. Number two, it's not only to do more or less, but it's all about to do the right thing. This could be sometimes what you call more and sometimes what you call less. But my main point is, let's have an example like Atalanta. This is an EU mission. It's led from Great Britain. The headquarters is in Great Britain. And it's the floor just the opposite of the NATO headquarters. This is a good model. It functions. It's okay. But you don't need a European SACEUR. Why? We should and could use the institutions we have. And within these institutions, we can have European operations without America. And this should be the way in the future.
Okay, but then I get you. Then we don't need a European headquarters or a European command structure.
We need a European planning capacity.
Okay.
You know the Weimar Triangle and what we try to do so, and it must be better than it was. Libya was an example for that. There must be more planning capacity. We offered it. We tried to persuade Great Britain to follow. They didn't so far. But this, for the foreseeable future, it's enough.
Okay. Now, of course, we have to get into some of the difficult questions. And since I don't work for you, that's okay. I can do this. Franziska, Libya. We have to mention the L word at some point. It used to be in the 2000s. The L word here meant liberal. Today, and in Germany, it means Libya. And do you think it was right for us to abstain, or didn't the German government actually have some pretty good objections in that, as we saw, part of the arguments it made were we don't have good intelligence on the ground on who the rebel leadership are, how well they're armed, how well they can function, and whether they're really able to protect themselves and perhaps oust Gaddafi. We don't have a good notion of what a post-Gaddafi Libyan order could look like and what we contribute to make that safe. Weren't those all good arguments for the Germans to abstain?
I was a very early defender of an intervention in Libya. And I was within the Green Party, where we still had, at the beginning, quite some opposition to it. I was one of those pushing it to the other side. And I'm still not regretting that. And I think that reality has shown that the cooperation with the rebels worked. And of course, the question of the post-world needs, I think, even more attention in the war phase. And if we don't deliver now, in terms of rebuilding, then we are completely, of course, proven wrong in that sense. But I think, now already saying it was a mistake, and I think at that time, for me, abstention was really, and I was in touch constantly with people on the ground, it was a political signal of we are not with you. And that was for me very difficult to accept. It was more difficult to accept than the, I would say, military decision not to go. But the abstention, that was, at least in that sense, a hard one. And I think, in terms of what we could have contributed, we could have contributed at least more in terms of the arms embargo, etc. So at that time, I felt sort of surprisingly as a green, I must say. I felt it's a switch of mentalities in Germany, that I'm fighting for a military intervention with the government, which is against it. But that's how history goes. Maybe that's normal, I don't know.
Well, interestingly, as presumably some of you know, there are a fair number of liberal hawks within the Greens. This is one of the unique characteristics of the Greens. General, how did you feel about the Libya abstention? Were you proud of that?
Very badly. I was a commandant of NATO, and we discussed it, of course, a lot. And so a lot of visitors, lecturers, ambassadors from all the countries. And I mean, they really blamed us for that. And at the same time, I mean, we have a Middle East faculty right now there at the NATO Defense College. And I mean, what is written in the strategic concept is to open up even more partnership that we have now, Mediterranean dialogue, ICI and so on. And so work closer with them together. And they really hoped and waited for NATO and of course also for Germany that have a very good reputation in the whole area. So from that perspective, it was we didn't understand why that was the case. And then I mean we praise the responsibility to protect, especially we in Germany. And I think it's a good thing to do so, to help the people there. And that was a chance. And so I don't know really why we missed the chance, and then why we didn't go with our allies, but with others that are not our greatest supporters. So that was a big disappointment and a big setback also, I think, in the trust, in the integration, and let's say, in the future also of operations. And we might go into more detail on that.
We will. Minister, I'm not going to go into the back and forth of the Libya decision here. I think that's fairly pointless. It's been done in many ways. But I would like to ask you is, what follows from Libya for Germany and Europe? What are the lessons from the Libya operation? I'm specifically thinking of the fact that when the accounting was done at the end of the intervention, it became very clear that while America was nominally leading from behind, it was actually contributing a great deal. It was contributing national command structures, it was contributing PGMs, and close air support in the form of A-10 Warthogs. None of that is stuff, as they say, unmilitarily, that we have a lot of. Does this mean that as Europeans we should invest in these capabilities?
Well, I would, of course, I would like to argue with these two arguments.
Please,
no.
Absolutely.
Because of obvious reasons, I don't want to do that. Perhaps in 10 years' time, the decision is made. I would make it as we did, but I think it's not useful to look backwards. Now the lessons. What is responsibility to protect creates a right to interfere, not a duty. And I foresee, and what you just said is a good example, a new sort of set of arguments. It's quite interesting that the military leaderships, in America, in Great Britain, in France, in Germany, were reluctant because of some reasons I don't want to
Go into.
not to be more detailed on that. And the decision-making process was pressed by human rights argument. Susan Rice and others changed the situation in America. And if you see killed soldiers from your own country, if you attended funerals, you must have not a human rights-driven decision. It can be one strong argument, but you need other arguments as well. How high is the price? Colin Powell said, and it was, you can't describe it better, when you go in, you have and take responsibility. And in advance, you should think if you are right to do so and if you are prepared to do so, and on which price. It's easy to go in. It's easy to persuade the people to go in. It's not that easy to persuade the people to stay. The majority in Germany for Afghanistan was high. Now the majority to leave is high, and we stand. And we stand stronger and more committed than others, including European partners. And the lesson is, think, also bedenke das Ende, think to an end. Think of the end. This is one lesson. Second lesson, if you want to have a UN resolution with Russia and China, then tell the truth. The text of the resolution was no fly zone. What we all had in mind was regime change. This will never happen again with Russia and China. So be very carefully by the wording of UN resolutions. And third, very practically, if you start it, you should be aware that you need ammunition and other things. Those three lessons I would mention.
Okay. Well, I think the Colin Powell rule was the bull in the china shop rule. You break it, you own it, which I always thought was a nice and pithy way of putting these things. But can I stay with you on this point, Minister, just for a second? Surely, if you said earlier that my depiction of a situation where the Americans might be involved elsewhere, busy elsewhere and needing their assets elsewhere, surely the fourth lesson of Libya is then that we are going to have to develop our own capabilities in ways that we don't have yet. And how do you, given the current economic crisis, given the spiraling costs of technology, how do we do that in Europe? How do we persuade the
Without
European?
further integration.
Exactly. I'm sure you'll have a answer.
Well, the fourth lesson is, or another lesson is, surveillance is important.
Mm-hmm. True.
We underestimated that. Now, a result is now, for example, the decision for AGS, just made in Brussels.
Alliance Ground Surveillance System, sorry, for those of you who don't do acronyms.
We discussed it for
living.
20 years, and now there's a decision. Interesting enough, AGS is now decided to be bought by 17 countries. Wie viele sind es, Ashley? 12? 13 countries, and run by 27. Why is this the case? Why, for example, Canada said no. France said, well, we have a contribution in kind. Great Britain said, well, we have a contribution in kind. But still, we made this compromise, an important one. And these are the answers. And it's not necessary that all countries are on board. So if you have 3, 4, or 5 to do things together, European countries, for example, then it's good. But you should not wait and must not wait for all NATO or European members then you will never have decisions. So more integration by doing things together, more interoperability, common education, common helicopter training, things like that, common tankers, common logistics in Navy issues. It's all important. And those who are on board are welcomed. But you must not label NATO or European Union. You just need nations. In parliaments to agree. Now, coming to my last point on budget restraints or restrictions. That's quite clear, we will have that. But the old discussion on having 2% of GDP for defense is an old discussion. We need an outcome-oriented discussion. What is effective? Now, how many, not how much you give in the system. And we should do it smarter, and we should have pooling and sharing. But a misunderstanding of smart defense is very often that you save money. That will not be the case. You can avoid additional
Expensive.
additional spending, but you will not reduce your own spending. Although some think so. There are countries who have capabilities. They try, under the label smart defense, that others pay what they now pay alone. And other countries who don't have capabilities, they have in their back that they can use it without paying. But this is not smart defense. This is budget dealing. Normal and understandable, but because of our budget restrictions, we have to think on capabilities which we desperately need to do it more common than alone.
Minister, I sense the member of the European Parliament next to me is fidgeting. So I think you have a European response to this.
No, I actually have 2 points that I would like, because you were, in my opinion, really misdefining responsibility to protect. You were saying it's a right to intervene and it has nothing to do with a duty or responsibility. And I really believe the responsibility to protect was exactly the opposite idea of saying, no, there are responsibilities and duties. And it's not just for you to
What's your answer
right.
on Syria then?
You know, we are debating right now much tougher sanctions, but also the option really of having a peacekeeping mission if there's a ceasefire. And we're having this debate within the Greens. I know it's off the record in many other debates. And I think that, you know, for me, the question you were saying, you need to define not more or less, but what is right. But how do you define what is right? If it's not a thing like human rights, of course it cannot be the only of course, never alone the only criteria. You need to check if you have the capacities to go there, if it's completely unfeasible, if you do more harm than you could do well. These are all factors, you know, that you have to take into consideration. I would never deny that. But what is your guiding principle? What will you tell the soldiers going? Why do they go there? And then for me, that would be my guiding principle, is one of defending rule of law, the international order we're part of. And part of that for me is the responsibility to protect. And, you know, in such cases where it's turned out to be militarily feasible, where we had, you know, compared to Syria, Libya was quite a unified rebellion when you compare it at least now to Syria. And of course, you never exactly know what's ending up. And I think we as Greens have been calling a long time to think from the end and strategically, etc. But when I hear it from you like this, it sounds for me because we will never be able to define completely the end. We will never do anything at the beginning. No. But, you know, in terms of like Libya or Syria. And then on the European question, sorry. You know, for me, the idea of having European responsibility without the US, which we will need in some cases, I'm almost certain, to get that without further really integration at the European level, I just don't see it happening because of all the nationalisms that you're talking about. Because exactly of free riders, exactly because people will just think about their national interest, and you will not get beyond that if you stay at a status quo level. And then we will have to go either, again, begging the US, begging the Ukrainians if they can lend us some equipment, you know, or invest much more at the national level. I just think it's not realistic.
I'm not against more integration and to have more common security and defense policy. My point is, let's do what we have. We fail in the running institutions. Somalia, for example. The only power which runs Atalanta in Somalia is the armed forces. I don't see police action there. I don't see someone who's thinking about Strafverfolgung,
Rule of law.
rule of law. I don't see a European initiative to change pirates to fishermen. Nothing. Where is the comprehensive approach of common European security policy where we have the institutions? So, and let's start what we have, and then let's think about further more integration. But sometimes I think to demand further integration steps is an excuse for not using the existing institutions. The soldiers are suffering that the comprehensive approach of Europe does not exist.
I agree.
That is my complaint.
Okay. Let's imagine that the Chancellor decides that Thomas de Maizière has to be federal president after all, and she asks you, Jan, to be the defense minister.
And she's desperate.
Okay, that's a personal aside. We can discuss that later over beer. But let's just imagine you are now in the position of the defense minister. After all, if you're with Carnegie Europe or a think tanker, it's easy to say the defense minister is getting everything wrong. You are now the defense minister. How do you proceed? How do you explain to your German citizens, to your chancellor, who is anxious for not to have to change the defense minister yet again, and to your fellow European defense ministers what needs to be done to take things forward?
I think the first thing that needs to be explained to the people, not only in Germany but Europe-wide, is that the geopolitical landscape is changing in such a way that the Europeans will not be able to sustain their efforts, the little efforts that they're actually putting on the table, despite the language that we've heard from the minister today, and that there will be painful things coming their way, one way or another. There is a price to be attached to be in relative decline, and to be partnering with a superpower that is in relative decline, but that is our last best hope for our own security.
So clearly you're not planning to run again in the next election.
Well, since my future as defense minister, and that job would be very limited, you can just as well start telling the truth. And so I think that's the first thing that I would try to tell them. Then I would try to explain to the German citizens, on the one hand, yes, we've come a long way. We've done a lot of things since reunification, and the list is impressive that you're giving. Still, that is measured by the yardstick of our internal debates. The external debates work differently, and the external debates demand a lot more of us. And we've made a fool of ourselves many times over the last 10, 15 years. Being that with the caveats in Afghanistan, being that with our unilateral kind of approach on technical nuclear weapons, being that on the Libya case that we've just debated. And you could continue the list. We're putting the foot on the brake on basically all security and defense developments in the European Council wherever we can. We have a strongly national approach coming out of the Defense Ministry, out of the Armaments Directorate of the Defense Ministry, a strong nationalistic approach to armaments and to pooling and sharing. German diplomats in Brussels are pulling their hair out, given the stuff that comes out of the Defense Ministry. So I think we have not performed well over the last 10, 15 years. And this has nothing to do with Germany bashing or with self-hatred or the usual kind of argument that you get. It has something to do with the external expectations, which are very different from the internal expectations. And I understand the big conundrum that a politician in your position is in, that he needs to cater to both sides. And that you will be hit by both sides all the time, because for the one you're doing too much and for the others you're doing too little. And then there's another thing, a final thing maybe that I think needs to be inserted into the debate. You've mentioned it in your speech here, but also in Munich. You said that we are already doing more as Germans than we sometimes can explain to our own people back home. And my feeling is that this is not true. I think that this is probably a pretense. When you look at the polls that came out around the time of the last federal elections in Germany in 2009, about 75% of the people said, we're basically against being deployed in Afghanistan. We don't think it's a good idea. But when you ask the same people how important that was for them, only 2 or 3% of the people asked said that this was actually an issue that was relevant enough for them to base their electoral decision on it. That's within the margin of error. The basic message in this is we don't like it, but it's really not all that important for us. And between those two things, there's room for leadership. I think a lot more can be done and a lot more can be explained to the European audience and specifically to the German audience, but we're not doing it properly. Instead, we're hiding behind this kind of thing. Already we're doing so much more than we can reasonably explain to the people. And I think, therefore, that there's room for maneuvering, not for frivolous adventures, but certainly for explaining things better and for gaining maneuverability also for the German leadership at the time, so that we don't run into a Libya thing anymore, which was mostly a case of playing up a big self-delusion, I think.
Unfortunately, I disagree again.
That's great.
That makes the debate more interesting.
Number one, on armament. There is no government among the big countries in NATO or European Union who are so open for multilateral armaments than Germany. You will not find that in France. You will not find it in Great Britain. France will build their own Rafales, and that's it. They compete against European competitors. This is the truth. Great Britain is not ready to involve in pooling and sharing. We are pushing it. I'm for a realistic perspective on that. But and all the huge armament projects we are in are not national. The Eurofighter is not. Tiger is not. So where you can think there are common armament projects? By the way, not very successful, a lot of them. Number one. Number two, well, now I'm quite arrogant. Sorry. You are a think tanker. You're sitting in institutes.
I love that.
I'm out in pubs. I discuss them with the people. Every week.
He goes to pubs as well.
Every week. And I don't agree with your analysis that Afghanistan is not important for the people. Not only as Minister of Defense, I was Minister of Interior, Homeland Security in advance. There is no group of people, political people, where you ask, why are we in Afghanistan? There is political leadership for 10 years and more to sustain this role. And as I just mentioned, we did it in the last 2 weeks better than other European countries. So please forget those prejudices that Germany is not ready enough, that all we are what we call Weicheier in German.
We're not going there.
Forget about it. Forget about it.
Cowards.
It's a quite strong leadership to get in January the new Afghan mandate through the parliament, including the opposition, with only 500 troops to reduce. If you compare this with other similar nations who are proud to speak your voice, the facts we show now are quite impressive.
Okay, I really hate to interrupt a good fight, but I do have 2 points that I would like to raise with the General before we go to Q&A. General, there's 2 developments that for you as a long-term serving Army officer, must be something that you watch with some worry, perhaps even. One, I think, is the changing nature of warfare. And 2 is the impact of spiraling technology costs. The changing nature of warfare, what do I mean? I mean the foreseeable end of nation building and stabilization ops as we know them to be replaced by a combination of intel, strategic intel, special forces, and drone warfare, what I facetiously called long-distance warfare. Which, of course, has, I think, as yet undescribed implications for the military culture, including of ours. The second point, spiraling technology costs, is something we can already see. The cyberization, if you want, of military equipment has already, I think, even without the economic crisis, proven to be a huge alliance wedge. And it is quite literally, as we speak, or I think has already split the alliance into cyber haves and cyber have-nots. How do you overcome that, and how do you deal with this changing nature of warfare thing? Does that worry you?
Yes, of course. I mean, first, I mean, to see the costs of all that, and that's what you are mentioning. I mean, that's another proof that we cannot do it alone in nations. Even the United States alone won't be able to do it alone. But so we have to seek for ways to work closer together and all that, and that's one of the reasons also to have smart defense very high on the agenda. So that's one, the cost thing, and we, the Germans or the Europeans, are not able to do that alone. I'm sure about
and it takes
this
us
one.
way beyond sharing and pooling.
No,
Yes.
The second thing, of course, is an education thing, and I mean we have to put this much more in our training and education than we have done it perhaps in the past. And also here, talking about training and education, we have to do much more together than we do. And this is a point, Minister, where I think we could start without putting the national interests of the individual countries into danger, because we don't have then to commit those forces, or not commit those forces because the national interests are different. But in education and training, I mean, it all starts with that, you know, to have a common sense about this. And we could do much more in Europe to put academies like the Führungsakademie or whatever, or lower level, much more together. And smaller countries can't afford in the future to have their own institutions. And so they are dependent on that. And I think that would be a good, let's say, strategic move to focus more in this direction. And also then, of course, to deal with all these questions that you have put on the table. But the problem is, I mean, for a single soldier, it's also very difficult to grasp all that. Very difficult. I mean, cyber, yes, we know it's there. Yes, we have to do something, cyber defense. But then, I mean, can you get along with this problem by just defending? No, cannot. So we have to have some other, also offensive actions, I mean, to do something about cyber. And here again, I mean, there are different interests, different opinions in different countries, how far you could go.
Sure. I'm conscious of the passage of time, which is why I'm going to open now for questions. As I said before, please identify yourselves with name and institution. There should be 2 microphones wandering around. And it's okay to make a comment, but make it as short as your question. So with that, you're kidding me. No questions? To no one?
There's one over here.
Over there, please. Can somebody give the gentleman a mic? Thank you.
Just go.
Well, maybe it works like this. First of all, thank you for this panel, very interesting discussion. My question goes somewhat back to, or relates to, this infamous radio interview that our former president, Horst Köhler, has given. Oh, excuse me, by the way, I'm Christian Schiller, I'm with the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. And I just wondered, you know, when listening to you, the minister, in the calculation of prices, when we're in the future talking about deployment of German forces in missions, I wonder, to what extent do you think Germany's economic interests, as a largely export-driven nation right now, should feature into our calculation of price? Should it at all feature? And I'd be interested to hear your position, but also from your colleague from the European Parliament, Frau Stetzenmüller. Thank you.
Who wants to go first, Minister?
Well, of course, it's important. And why are we in Somalia? We protect the World Food Programme. This is our main task. And then we protect civil trade. And this is one of the most popular missions we have in Germany. So the old discussion is gone, is over. But on the other hand, we are not servants of economy. When we send soldiers, we have to define our national interests or a common responsibility. So when the German was ein Reeder, when the ship owner asked for policemen or soldiers on each ship, and then they say, well, we could pay for that. I say, no, we are not your servants. So there are economic influences on national security issues. We are talking about a wide world of security, but this is not what we would say a monocausal context between their interest and national interest.
You know, by the way, on the Italians, their response was, if you pay our soldiers, we go on board with you. And now they pay the soldiers. That's how they finance part of the army now. Anyways, but you know, for me, the question is how you phrase it. If you ask, you know, is it in our interest to support well-being, stability worldwide? I would say yes. But then, of course, the question is then a military answer the only one? And I think, you know, for Somalia, Atalanta, you know, it doesn't do anything, as you said, to really do anything to the root causes. And in that sense, you know, is it a sufficient, even, you know, might spontaneously help, but certainly will not do anything in terms of really helping in the long-term German interests, of really making Somalia a country where you could, you know, get by again without any sort of security. So for me, this question is broader, how you define it, and then I come to the comprehensive approach you were talking about before. And there I actually agree with you that we don't have that comprehensive approach, that when we go in, often we don't know what to do afterwards, and we don't know how to get out of the conflict cycle. We don't know how to do conflict prevention well enough. And there, of course, there's always a mix of economic interests and others. I don't see any situation where there is no single ever economic interest. But for me, that can't be the guiding ever principle of what we do. It is always there, and it always has to be considered. And the same, for example, is now true for Libya. I don't think, you know, you can completely separate it. And if you allow me very briefly on the comprehensive approach, you could do a lot to improve that at the European level. Germany would be wonderful if that would be to push from Germany. I give you one example right now in Libya. We have
I'd take you with me to the next ministerial
I would love to.
Yes.
I know there are the Frenchies who are a bit tough on this sometimes, but allow me to give you one example where
an offer, Francisco.
I'd go with you.
Yes.
And I've been
always take these initiatives.
But you
yes.
Just to make it a bit sometimes more precise, it helps to say what is it about. We have now a needs assessment 6 months afterwards in Libya, already way too late. But the EU is responsible for border management, media, and civil society. Water management, it's the ESDP doing. So they go, they have a secure trip, EU security, they can walk around the entire country, have security. Then for the media and civil society, we have national experts coming from development ministries, whatever. They don't get EU security. They have to go to the respective national embassy to ask for security. Most of them can't go out of the Tripolis area. They don't talk to each other. And then they're supposed to guarantee and build up long-term security and stability in Libya. It's doomed to fail. And for me, this is, ridiculous splitting up into here's the ESDP, there's the rest. And I know the Frenchies are specifically strong about that, but I think there could be some more pushes to really get us to a smarter institutional setup at the European level. And that might be, very useful. And because I really think if we don't get the institutions right, we won't get the rest.
All right. Questions? Sorry, over there? Yes, please.
I have 5 minutes
Yep,
to
5
leave.
minutes. You won't?
You can continue. But,
That's fine. I don't think they will. They'll take that one last question and then we'll wrap.
General Hospital. As a PhD in computer science, I can very much see what the General has hinted at before, and I had a question at the Minister. While PhDs in computer science of MIT, Berkeley, or Stanford are basically headhunted by the American National Security Agency and all the other agencies, that America has a very, very strong take on the cyber age and cyber war. I don't see anything like it at all in Germany, and I wonder, are we taking care of the good minds that our country, brings out, especially in the sciences, or do we just let them go?
I think that was a question for you, Herr Minister.
Yes. Do you take her on board as well? That was the question.
yes, I will. I had to deal a lot with this in my former job as Minister of the Interior or Homeland Security. And there I started a lot of initiatives, as you perhaps know. And that we installated a national cyber center. We brought the governmental and non-governmental institutions together. And I think there's a lot of progress. And Germany, if you compare the situation in Germany with the situation in other European countries, we are among the leading countries there. I very much supported Nelly Cruz when she started her responsibility as commissioner there. We have to do it together. So it's not as good as it should be, but not as bad as it could be. So we are on our way, and this is not too bad. I would like to make a last remark on what General Löser just said, and we very much for these common training initiatives and all these things, although there is a lot. From session to session, I push these issues. But then, of course, the Germans say, well, we have a very good Führungsakademie. We all invite to come to us. Mm-hmm. Then the other European countries say, well, why Germany? Let's put it to let's say, Lisbon. Then we, in a second, answer, well, it's a quite old tradition. The German Führungsakademie is better than the others. We won't agree. The Czech Republic now is offering to concentrate helicopter training within NATO or within European countries in Czech Republic. On speeches we say, very welcome that. And our own national interest is that perhaps we can avoid that by offering our own center for helicopter training. For all others, in Bückeburg, for example. Then a typical European answer is, okay, let's double it, or we have 3 or 4 or 5 of these places. Then you can forget about it. So it's easy to say, to neglect national interest on that. Pooling and sharing is meant by the big countries. We invite all the others to do so. In special issues, we do so, for example, air policing on the Baltic states. But it's a hard job to restrain national interest when the consequence is to close more barracks, more bases, reduce their own capabilities. I'm ready to do that, and we are on our way. But I would like to invite all of us to reduce the expectations.
Minister, I don't know how to say this, but I'm going to get killed if I don't stop you now.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry.
Things are not as good as they could be, not as good as they should be, but not as bad as they could be. I think that's a good way of ending. Let me ask you all to help me thank our panelists for, I think, a fascinating panel.
Ja, machen wir gerne.
Vielen Dank.
Tschüss, gute Reise.